everybody, it's so great to have you tonight at SALON LUITPOLD. It's our panel for this technology, so quite, yeah, fatigué in the French. Oh, but we have such an amazing panel that we have to be concentrated now. Nowadays we have to get used to this very military terminology. We have maybe a lot to do. I'm tired, as you notice. So from the lab to the battlefield, I could have never imagined to say such titles in my case here, but we are at the time now. I had the honor yesterday to be in the room with Commissioner Boris, and so I'm well prepared. And now I have the honor to hand over to Andrijanič, who is sitting on the left side, who organized which, yeah, go ahead. And actually I'm trying to look in my salon for like almost half a year, and Thorsten, who's working for him with him in the Deep Institute, and he will talk to you more about that. And that was it for me. And normally we discuss on the panel for about an hour, and then you can join in with your questions. So happy that you are here. I hope that as you're ready for. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming, and let me kick this meeting off with a quote. The only way we are going to sustain any military advantage that we may still have, and the only way we're going to survive as a Ukrainian nation, is by bringing down innovation cycles from years to months, from months to weeks, from weeks to days, from days to hours. What we're doing today to survive is real-time innovation. As you may have guessed, this quote comes from a brave soldier on the Ukrainian front line. I always knew the topic from lab to the battlefield. It's going to be a fascinating one. After today's conversation with this Ukrainian officer, you just get another level of intensity and urgency, and what some people discuss in terms of trending innovation. For some people, actually, it's a matter of survival. So I'm really happy to discuss this topic today with our esteemed panelists. If I could dream of a panel, this would be it. So maybe with a slightly different gender mix. We have two former senior military leaders, one turned advisor, one turned investor. We have a Silicon Valley defense tech entrepreneur, and we have a senior minister from a European country in charge of digitization and innovation. I will introduce the panelists as we go along, so we're going to start going into the topic. Before we do that, let me continue with a quote from the Ukrainian. He told me, Marco, if you really want to go ahead with a title from the lab to the battlefield, it just shows you're old school. If you want to be relevant, make the battlefield your lab. On that happy note, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome our esteemed panelists. And a round of applause, please. We just spoke about the battlefield, so let's go to the battlefield, the naval battlefield. Maurice Frank Ronald Lloyd, known as Ron Lloyd, Vice Admiral, former 35th Commander of the Royal Canadian Navy. He was Chief of Defense Staff. He was also Chief Data Officer, Kingpin of Canadian Military Innovation. Sure. Also a military diver, a certified paratrooper. So I think nobody else would be more relevant to tell us in the battlefield. how have you gone about bringing innovation from technology to your daily service?
Very. So the challenges for large militaries, incubation and opportunity to battlefield. Okay, I think this might have enough. So the question was, how did we do it? And the answer is very poorly. And so to give you a sense of that, in 2017-18, I provided the AI use cases for the Navy to industry. And the fact that they were large original equipment manufacturers and there was no one in the audience that was from what we would consider software providers, that was probably my first clue that was going to be a bit of a challenge. And so when it comes to that, what are large bureaucracies designed to do? Eliminate innovation and opportunity. And they do that remarkably well. They're like the white blood cells in your body. Anything that gets in there that's could be problematic is summarily dealt with. And so since retirement, I've been trying to understand why is it that this is such a struggle for large bureaucracies, large militaries. And I've come up with this concept called aggregate risk. Because we often talk about risk, but risk is different for each one in the audience in terms of what risk we're trying to identify and mitigate. And so if we're having a conversation about risk, and one person perceives it as being high and the other low, it's because we're probably focused on different risk elements. And so I believe that every organization, every one of your companies, nations, has an aggregate risk, somewhere between low to high, and then over time you implement policies that are going to try and mitigate that risk. When the world has changed as much as it has in the last 3 to 4 years, last 3 to 4 months, one would argue, those policies were put in place for a different era in a different paradigm. And so when you try and say to your staff, I want to accept risk, and I want to do something as crazy as putting Wi-Fi at sea, what do you think the answer from your staff is? No, sir, it can't be done. And what do you mean it can't be done? Like cruise ships have Wi-Fi, everyone has Wi-Fi, like you can't do that big a deal. Oh, no, sir, can't be done. Why? Policy. And so, okay, policy, bring me the policy. So sure enough, in comes the staff, there it is highlighted in yellow, no Wi-Fi at sea, too risky. Okay. Who owns that policy? Well, it's the commander of the Navy. Okay, thank you very much. I'm the commander of the Navy. Let's change the policy. And so it took me, as commander of the Navy, probably about 3 months to convince the team that we needed to change the policy. They subsequently went to the assistant deputy minister of materiel to say that Lloyd's crazy, we're accepting too much risk to try and change it. Fortunately, that assistant deputy minister said, what does that got to do with material assurance? And they said nothing. Fortunately said, okay, fine, give the Admiral Wi-Fi at sea. And so these policies, and they're not legislative, they're actually policies, guidelines, directives, security guidance, tools that are put in place by bureaucracy to mitigate this risk, pretty much ensures that the policy and the transition risk includes any innovation getting to the battlefield in a timely fashion. And so until we can get our bureaucracies focused on the right risk, real world risk that's being assumed by our young Canadian sailors, soldiers, aviators, special forces operators, or whatever nation they represent, until that becomes the real focus of the risk, it's going to continue to be a challenge. And this is where the Ukrainians are very lucky, as we talked previously, is they're not encumbered by a lot of policies at this juncture, because survival is the risk that they're focused very much on in every single day.
Thank you, Ron. In fact, when I asked the gentleman this morning about policies, he said, we don't have the luxury to afford policies. Mark, I hope you don't take it personally when we talk about bureaucracy to talk to you. Mark Boris Andrijanič, he's Senior Fellow of the Atlantic Council. He's board member of the European Institute of Technology, which is the bigger institution compared to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's also young fellow of the World Economic Forum, and for the last 15 years he's been advising deep tech, defense, and quantum and AI companies on governmental affairs. Previously, he was Slovenia's head of digitization and innovation. And as a little side story, I have a tiny little farm in Slovenia in the middle of nowhere, and we got fiberglass optical internet about 5 years before we got it here in Munich. So thank you very much, Mark.
It says a lot about Munich, not necessarily Slovenia.
Mark, we've just heard that policies are a big impediment to speedy innovation. Now, you've been working really hard with deep tech defense companies to counter that. You're in Brussels, you're talking to local governments, you're all over the place, you're working with Silicon Valley AI companies to help them and understand Europe, its funny arcade systems. Tell us, what can we do and what is already being done to make policies more innovation friendly, especially in the defense space?
This is going to be a very short answer. Not enough, or let's say not too much. Now, I think for the first time, at least in the EU, we understand that there's a huge need for regulation. I shouldn't say deregulation. Regulatory simplification. That's the word that crosses first. And I think ever since the Draghi report was published, there's been this momentum, and all of a sudden, everyone Brussels agrees that something is that obviously the Brussels tech exporting tech regulations in the world hasn't really materialized. The contrary, actually, campers are going to innovate and game for AI, cloud, and many other technologies. So I think right now, finally, we have a common language, and we finally see some of the outcomes already. So there's been simplification that's a process of digital regulation. On the defense and military front, we also had some super interesting, just suggestions, but regulations adopted, meaning that it can only take 60 days for the permitting process when it comes to new defense facilities in the EU. And I mean, this kind of surgical interventions, I think, are super cool because we can do them without a comprehensive change of legislation, which we all know takes forever, but we've had the need. For example, if you look at Horizon Europe, which is our biggest research and innovation process, it takes 274 days for a single application to be processed. Now, in the world of AI, this is a lifetime. And why don't we put a similar kind of deadline, let's say 90 days instead of 60, to get this kind of application processed? And with this kind of, I think, very simple measures, you could make this bureaucracy much more effective. And what's important to note is that Europe used to have this speed mojo in the past. If you look at France, between mid-70s and mid-80s, in a little more than 10 years, they were able to build 34 nuclear reactors. The last nuclear reactor that was connected to the grid last year took 17 years to build. So we had this need for speed already in the past. And we can see it now in China, we can see it in the Middle East, we can see it in India and other places. And I think we need to be humble and say, you know, we have a lot to learn from the emerging champions of the world. And the arrogance that we've had so far, like, oh no, they're so different, oh no, we can do that, is totally out of question.
Mark, thank you for that. Let me just challenge that quickly. I'm aware that I haven't used all the panelists yet, but again, speaking to the Ukrainian gentleman this morning, he said when one of his colleagues falls ill or gets injured, he goes to the hospital and comes back 2 months later to the battlefield, he needs to get completely retrained. So 60 days seems like a lifetime. Is there a sense of urgency from Brussels and elsewhere that even is too much?
I think there's a sense of urgency, but let me tell you one thing, and this will require more than just a change of regulation. If you look at Ukraine today, what they've mastered is what I call an agile and frugal approach to innovation, which means that they're able to iterate super fast and produce a lot of stuff that's just good enough to do the job. Now, we are sitting in Munich, a city renowned for engineering excellence. You produce stuff here that's cutting edge, but there's a problem. It costs a fortune, and it takes decades to develop. That's the luxury we don't have. So for European industry, especially in defense, we simply need to make this switch from, I would say, incremental, super sophisticated innovation to this agile, frugal approach to whatever we do here.
Agile and frugal, let me stick with that. And that seems to be like the mantra of many entrepreneurs, especially with a lean entrepreneurship model. Here we have a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, Lloyd, who's founder and CEO of Primer AI. to find out what Primer AI does. Prima facie, it provides artificial intelligence-based applications for those who protect our security and democracy. Now, that sounds a little bit James Bond-esque or general trading company. So I asked Google, Gemini, it says Primer AI provides advanced AI-powered intelligence platforms that analyze, summarize, and extract insights from massive volumes of unstructured data. Designed for national security, government, and enterprise clients.
Users detect threats, monitor trends, and make informed decisions faster. Prior to that, Sean was CTO of Quid, a data visualization company. And for all of you who think that wasn't rocket science enough, Sean used to work for NASA, working on self-repairing nanocircuits, whatever that may be. And he was advising the Pentagon, US CENTCOM, on defense innovation adoption. That's very impressive. So maybe you can tell us your frugal and agile approach to bringing AI to the battlefield, and also whether you've encountered any impediments to bringing your product to market.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I sold the company 2 years ago, so I'm thankfully no longer the CEO, but still the founder of it. But we start. But it was also a time when we where starting a defense tech startup in Silicon Valley was something that was not allowed. Right? You didn't have the social license to operate a defense tech company because defense was bad, and Silicon Valley didn't think beyond that. So we came in there. We deployed ultimately to 10 of the 16 US intelligence agencies running the very first language models of above 100 million parameters on top of all the classified intelligence running across those agencies. We were also one of the first participants in Project Maven, which was the first DoD AI project. And we went into that space, and I'll say, you get all the challenges that you talked about, except it wasn't Wi-Fi. They had Wi-Fi, but they didn't have GPUs. Right? It was, will this run on a CPU? And I was like, no, not really. So you're going into the space where it's like, firstly, credit for taking on AI deployment in 2015, well done. But like you have all of the issues going through it. But then at the same time, the Valley wasn't also kind of like the best either. Its issues were cultural. Like you're not allowed to do defense. That's not something you're allowed to do. And really that's only changed in the last kind of 12 months or so. But what Silicon Valley does do well is it moves very quickly. It is able to throw capital and large amounts of capital of talented people who are able to kind of iterate and actually start to execute and deliver. So I think the journey through that was very interesting. And the competition was against the large primes who hadn't probably developed a single line of decent code in 20 years. So that was pretty straightforward. But you then get caught up in all the kind of the Byzantine structures of procurement. And so, your customers like, we want this. Your technology's like, we can do this. You've figured out the GPU issues. And then they're like, now we're going into procurement. And the procurement process is, inside the DoD, inside the intelligence, is terrible. And then the government shuts down. And then, as a company, you're like, well, I'll just wait. So all the kind of dynamics that go together is like Silicon Valley is part of the puzzle. And I think now that Silicon Valley has figured out defense is actually okay, I think it can move very, very fast. But all the other pieces have to go with it. And then the final bit I'll say is, Silicon Valley is good at solving problems that they know about. There's no sort of surprise that the best AI tool at the moment is AI for coding. And the reason for that is because everyone who's coding is like, oh yeah, I know that problem. Silicon Valley has no real idea of what defense means. And the sort of the visions they have of it are kind of like, I saw Top Gun, great movie. But like that's kind of it, right? And I was like, well, I'll make something like that. And I think that link between understanding the problems that really matter on the battlefield, that matter to the warfighters, is that link that allows Silicon Valley to unlock and do what it does really well. So again, Silicon Valley will do its thing. We've got capital, we've got talent, we've got the speed to move fast, but we've got to have the other pieces of the puzzle as well.
Thank you, Sean. You just mentioned the question of capital, and I'm handing over to a man who sits on a lot of capital, Sean. Maybe you're going to clarify that if that's true. John Ridge, you are the CAO of the NATO Innovation Fund. Now, for all of you who don't know what CAO stands for, it's Chief Adoption Officer. And for all of you who don't know what a Chief Adoption Officer does, I'm reading this as he's working closely with NATO defense ministries and governments to get innovative technology into the hands of end users across the alliance. That sounds exactly like the solution to our topic of our conversation. Just as a framing, prior to joining the Innovation Fund, John spent over 3 decades in the United Kingdom Armed Forces and government. He joined the army in 1998, so he bring an old hand in the business. Actually originally studying to be an architect or an architectural engineer, if I get this correctly. So a very, very interesting transition. And he had multiple positions within the UK ministry, including Director of Innovation. So your innovation seems to be sort of the red thread in your CV. So John, tell us, first of all, how do you deploy capital in an area that so far has been considered uninvestable? And secondly, how do you make sure that when you invest capital, what you invest in also gets adopted?
So first, I'm going to have to pull the thread on Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley's dirty secret is it came out of defense. That's where it was born.
Not a big secret.
But a secret to some of the people in Silicon Valley who, as you say,
many things are secrets to people in Silicon Valley. That's a different conversation.
But I think it's really important to be remembered. That's how it was born. It was born out of radar. It was born out of electronic warfare. So we're kind of going full circle. I think it's worth, before I come to your question, I think it's worth also contextualising why this is different. Because we've got a system that's configured for a world that's gone. The world that's gone is where your cutting edge of defence came from giving money to government labs or to government defence industry funded research and development programmes to build a thing which you then concealed from your adversary and gave you a technological edge against them. That's gone. Exactly as you've just described. The technologies which now give us cutting edge are technologies which are available to everyone. They're democratized. That's why your Ukrainian knows that you've got to iterate quickly. Because everyone's got access to this. The one who wins is the one who can spirally develop faster and faster than their adversary and keep that OODA loop, to use in the technology. They're just spinning faster than their opposition. That's interesting because the companies that are doing that are the ones who are funded by private capital. So we've kind of got a system that's configured for government funding of research and development, but it's trying to solve problems that are developed by a completely different part of the ecosystem. It is never dealt with. It doesn't understand them. It doesn't help us deal with them. They're often smaller than it's used to. They don't have the same amount of bureaucracy. So we've got this kind of clash of cultures, which is why it's really difficult. Exactly as you say, it used to be really difficult to get finance to come to sort of help out these companies that are trying to scale. It's fascinating, and we've released a report from the NATO Innovation Fund on the deal room, which was released on Tuesday. And we released it last year, and we've just released a second iteration of it. The last 2 or 3 years have been extraordinary in seeing the amount, particularly in Europe, the amount of capital that's coming in. So I remember 2.5, 3 years ago, we were writing, whilst I was in the Ministry of Defence, we were writing for our ministers to put things in the paper to appeal to investors to say, hey, look, stop treating security like you do pornography and tobacco. These are not sin capabilities. These are critical underpinnings. Don't have security at one end and ESG at the other, because you cannot have ESG if you don't have security. It feels like that debate has run a hell of a long way, frankly, because we're kind of now seeing capital moving in Europe at reasonable scale. We're not there yet. We've got quite a lot in those early stages, and as a fund we invest in seed to Series B, so relatively early stages in companies. What we've got to see now is the really big sums of money coming. These later stage investors, sort of Series D and beyond, where people are going to have to buy $50, $100 million checks. We haven't got that in Europe yet. We absolutely need to have it. Because if you bring that capital, that comes from bear, that allows these companies to scale. The reason that's not in yet is because it sort of doesn't matter how good your technology is, it doesn't matter how much early stage funding you've got. If you haven't got contracts with ministries of defence, the market doesn't recognise your success. And we've seen, I think the US has come a long, long way on this, and we're starting to see the contracts again to Andrew and yourselves. We've got glimmers of that in Europe. So, STAR recently, a very large contract with the German government to deliver laboratory emissions. In the UK, we've seen clever start to land contracts, but that's got a long, long way to go. That's the way this whole ecosystem gets turbocharged. It's like good contracts, that becomes revenue, that makes these companies investable, that brings in the late stage capital. That's how we grow the unicorns.
Thank you very much. And let's stay with the capital side for a minute. This morning I heard in a panel at the MSC, I had a really interesting, very simplified analysis that said that a couple of years ago, Europe had no political will to support defense, but lots of money. Now it has a lot of political will, and the money's running out. So is the NATO Innovation Fund the solution? If not, what is? How are we going to manage to mobilize the amounts of capital that we need to achieve exactly what you said, scale up, and not just become a supplier of cheap startups bought up by American funds or Asian funds?
So we're beneath this part of it, but we're 1 billion euros invested over 10 years. In the big scheme of things, that's not a huge amount of money. But what we can do is we can start to change the way people feel about defence. And as I say, the last couple of years have been successful on that front. We're starting to invest. Part of the way we do our investments is into parts of the ecosystem in Europe that are underfunded and don't have a particularly vibrant VC ecosystem. Germany and the UK are in a pretty good position, frankly, but there are other parts that still need that some early stage. So invest in funds that start off in those areas. So all of that's going to help. I come back to this one. It's got to be about contracts. The only way this changes, and when you look at how much money is already spent in Europe on defence, let alone what comes in when you start to move to these commitments to 3.5 in defence and an additional 1.5% of GDP against broader resilience, that's a lot of money. If it all goes to the traditional suppliers to build traditional equipment, we will defect. We absolutely still need ships, aircraft and tanks because they're part of the arsenal which we need as Europe. But on top of that, we also need these novel capabilities, whether it's AI enabled, whether it's autonomy, whether it's space capabilities, whether it's new sensing in the underwater domain. These are all things which come out of different sectors, novel solutions, often a lot cheaper, so you get more for your money. So a long way to go, but it's all about contracts.
Thanks very much. Sean, if I'm interpreting your body language correctly, you're dying to say something?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, look, the private markets, is not the end answer, right? The government is the customer. The customer has to spend the money, and it has to spend it quickly. Because when you're a startup going through this and innovating on that, you've got a 2-year horizon from when you raise money to when you need to raise money again. And if your procurement process is even half that time, which would be very, very fast, you get one shot before you die. And so it's all about contracts. It's all about contracts moving quickly. And look, the money's going to go somewhere. But the reality is that a lot of people who are program managers have to kind of take that risk and say, I'm going to bet on the 50-person German company that's building a hypersonic missile instead of the 5,000-person company that I've given money to before, right? And so that dynamic is where you've got to get comfortable with going all in on a bet that doesn't look like anything you've made before, and you've got to get comfortable doing it at 2x, 3 times the speed that you've ever done it before. So this is again the cultural shift that needs to come, because without that cultural shift, the startups can't do what they do. We're playing a game where every day we're going in, we're putting all in on red, and we're hoping that bet pays off, right? But if you go on that and you don't have an answer to that bet that you've made because the government's moved too slowly, you die, right? Like as a company, you don't exist.
Thank you. Ron, we've just heard that John's money isn't everything. We need government contracts. Now, you were the customer in the past. What do you say to that?
Absolutely, and the challenge is back to procurement. Like, our history is procuring widgets, okay? So when it comes to procuring digital, It's completely different. Your statement of requirements aren't there. It's not easy for a project manager to go tick, 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 tick. We got what we procured. So in the digital realm, it's far more different. And so the risk flips to the risk of the procurement. And did we spend dollars for citizens that represent value for money? And if we didn't, then it's negative. The Auditor General gets involved, and there's just more policies put on these digital procurements. And digital procurement, as much as they're going to mitigate risk, real world risk, because they're digital, they're perceived as actually representing higher risk. Relative to the status quo, it's lower risk. Relative to going and procuring something like a black box, high risk, and that's what's focused on. So we fundamentally need to get after these policies, and I'll go back to this culture point. I don't know how many of you have heard of Cotter, culture strategy for breakfast. If he was writing that after his experiences with Canadian government, he would write small big policies that inform the culture, eventually your strategy for breakfast. And so we're going back to that. If we don't get ahead of this, then it's going to continue to be problematic. And it's all digital right now. And we're not going to be inside the decision cycle of our adversaries. We don't care about the ethical use of AI in the battle space. And so if we can't get there using it ethically, we don't stand a chance when they're not using it.
Thank you. So procurement only works if there's political will. Mark, your day job is to create political will for your customers, for clients, working as a governmental affairs professional. Tell us, what's your take on this?
So I think when I was building up the Ministry for Digital Transformation in my home country, I tried to set it up as a startup, meaning that I tried to bring in some good talent from the private sector and also, the ambitious young, capable people from other parts of the government to create disruption within this large and slow-moving beast. And I soon realized that my main opposition wasn't sitting in the parliament, but around me. It was the bureaucracies around me, which is incredibly resistant to change. And I think at the end of the day, Ukraine and my experience can be part of the answer. Unless you bring in a combination of people with private sector experience, folks coming from the tech sector or whatever other private sector background, and mix it with capable, ambitious public servants, you just can't deliver the value. In Ukraine's case, Mikhailo Fedorov, the current defense minister, who started out as the digital minister, came from the private sector. He brought with him the whole team of the best Ukrainian innovators, entrepreneurs, digital marketing experts, and so on. And he basically ran his digital ministry like a private sector company, like a tech company. And he was able to bring Ukraine from 110 on the digital index to number 5 in the world, creating, I would say, the most advanced and the best government mobile app in the world in the process. So that would be one part of the equation. The second part that I wanted to emphasize is it's not just about procurement. Boris needs to work harder on unifying the European defense market. Currently, it does not exist. We have 27 defense markets. And what we see right now is German companies winning drone contracts in Germany. Not a single Ukrainian drone company won any tender in Europe, despite producing the best drones in the world. Like, we're still, despite all the right rhetoric, acting in a super nationalist way. And that will get us nowhere. Because what we need to, I think, encourage is joint procurement, different countries joining forces to buy cutting-edge stuff, enabling our startups and scale-ups to scale even further, because even if we have Helsinki sell everything they have to the German government, but not to the French government, nor the Polish or the Italian, they will get pretty much nowhere. And if we look at the world ranking of top defense companies, there's only one European company in top 10, and that's BAE in the UK. Rheinmetall, who we commend all the time, is number 20. We need 2 or 3 more companies getting into those top 20 or preferably in top 10, and for that you need a unified market. And I think this should be the #1 homework of the folks in Brussels. And one of the cool instruments that enabled creating I would say a very flexible defense tech market in Ukraine was an invention called Grade 1 market. So imagine an Amazon for defense tech products, for drones, for lasers, for all kinds of meter equipment and so on. They established it, which means that they connected a vetted supplier, meaning a drone manufacturing startup, directly with the military unit on the ground that's the end user of that product. And they can order different stuff, experiment, test, create a feedback loop, post a review, star it, and that's for everyone else to see. And that's how you're creating basically a unified market that's actually working. And I think we need this kind of grade 1 market also at the European level. Obviously not to procure a nuclear submarine, but to procure drones and other stuff that aren't super sophisticated and systemic. And without doing this, meaning connecting the producer, the supplier, with the end user, I'm afraid we're going to be stuck with very conservative procurement departments ever after.
Thank you, Mark. I thought the Amazon of defense was called the dark net, but maybe I'm wrong.
By the way, U.S. Army also adopted this kind of platform, I think, a couple of months ago. So it's working.
I think all honor to you that you say the EU needs to coordinate. I'm just wondering whether in the area of defense it should be NATO to have this sort of coordinating role. And I saw you grabbing the mic viciously. So I'm sure you've got some interesting insights on that side.
Yes, there's so many things I want to pick up on there, but I'm going to constrain myself to two. One is that I think we are starting to take green shoots. So two of our portfolio companies, Together and ARCS, and in fact three, so Stark, have managed to get to the point where, despite being based in Portugal, Germany, and Germany, they build factories in the UK. So we're seeing the best ideas, the best IP, but then you get the advantage in the market you're selling to of the jobs, of the supply chains, all those benefits. That feels to me like a model that's really successful, because of course countries where they're spending lots of defence, they want some of that to come back into their own coffers. That's entirely understandable. And it feels like that's a good way of doing it. So it shouldn't matter where the idea comes from, the jobs, the supply chains, the benefits generated in the country. So that's the first thing. And the second is, because they always disagree slightly. So the bit around culture I do get frustrated with, because it's this kind of nebulous thing which we observe because of culture. I always, when I'm thinking about why things are not working, go back to why that human being made that decision. And culture's not good enough. It's about the incentives that surround it. It's about the incentives those decisions are based on those. So we always complain about this commercial staff, this commercial staff, and they're taking risk averse. The reason for that is that most of the time, certainly in the UK system, the commercial staff live in a chain of command, using military terminology, which is commercial. And at the top of that is the most important commercial person whose job is to zero the commercial risk. So do not be surprised that everyone who works for them is incentivized to zero the commercial risk. If you take those commercial staff out, you put them in the program team or project team, and say you're now immersed in why this thing is being done. You're with the end user, you see their problem, you really engage with that. All their motivations change and their decision making change. So to me, culture is a get out clause. We should stop talking about culture and we should say, why is that human making the wrong decision for the good of the system? I think it comes back to your point, risks. Because all those risks, if they're held, if the right risks are the ones that are prioritised, and every time you don't have a capability in the hands of an end user that needs it, that is a massive risk. And for the warfighter, that could cost them their lives. And that is the risk which we need to get back to. And that's about closing that decision cycle so that it's faster and faster to get to the right.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, in a minute, we'll open the floor for questions. Before I do that, I would just like our panelists to come up with a very short sentence. Imagine it's Christmas, and imagine our goal is to make the battlefield our land. What is the one wish you have that's going to bring us towards making that happen? Let's start with you, Ron.
I wish that leadership would get out of the road.
Thank you. Big one.
I guess we're at war at that point with everyone. So maybe it's not a Christmas wish. I mean, I think that's the worst thing, right, is to have the battlefield as a lab. I mean, my God, right? That means we're at war and we're having to kind of defend our country based on like the iterations we lose. We should hope that never happens. But we should plan and iterate so that we are in a place where the technology that we've got precludes anyone ever coming after us and trying to mess with us.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I agree being too short, and I think, Sean. So when I said leadership, I don't mean leadership in the sense of that's what you do as a good leader. I meant senior executive, 3 stars, 4 stars. Like, give it to the young sailors, soldiers, aviators, special forces operators. Get out of the road, and they're going to be extraordinarily successful. And so that's what I meant by my very short statement.
That's good.
Thank you for the clarification.
The zone of defense and plenty of budget to scale it up. Thank you. Mark.
So my wish would be to stop looking at defense as a pure defense play, but in the context of an industrial and technological as well as competitive response. Because even once, and hopefully soon, the war in Ukraine is over, we need to maintain the momentum. And we need to see technology here in Europe, defense technology, as a catalyst for our broader competitiveness. Currently, we're lacking the edge in many of the key tech areas, and perhaps with all of these investments we're making right now in super smart people in defense, we'll be able to regain some of this edge in this area, and that will make us eventually richer, not just safer.
John?
So all I would do, not very much, is these hundreds of billions which are going to come into defence budgets over the next 5 years. Let's be modest and say let's put 10% of that into the new suppliers, the non-traditional suppliers, the startups, the scale-ups, and the overrides. That would have a transformative effect.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure there are some questions in the audience. I'm not sure how this is going to work from a technical... okay. Should we...
Thank you. I'm Andrijanič from the European University Institute. I'm new security initiative. I have a question about, I think it's rather clear, everyone kind of agrees that the future of defense is not like a few very expensive assets, but many kind of inexpensive assets. But there's another kind of categorization that I would like to understand, think about this. Like, are we going into this direction of, okay, we're not going to have lots of main battle tanks, but kind of Toyota Hiluxes strapped with heavy machine guns, like kind of dumb tech, lots of dumb tech that is locally adaptable, that an individual unit can test and see if it works for their specific kind of side of the front line? Or are we looking at like lots of cheap instantiations of very high tech, so kind of drone swarms that can communicate with each other? Because the thing is, we're taking all this kind of innovation from intelligence, I guess, from a war and the history of wars that the last 20 years, which is fundamentally, I hope I won't offend anyone, but at the beginning, when Ukraine's armed forces and Russian armed forces clashed, so it's 2 very low-tech armies, right? Like none of those 2 armies were able to really maintain combined arms warfare. So there's kind of a selection bias. We're learning from low-tech warfare. So do these lessons really hold for a future where perhaps we would have forces like the US and China and so on clashing with them?
Sean?
Yeah, look, I think it's sort of a reminder, like, China is not Russia. Like, and I think the best look in the lessons of history of wars when you have a technological offset that renders the previous technology useless against that. So nuclear weapons, stealth weaponry, precision-guided munitions, and the next one's artificial intelligence. And it's gonna take a big jump forward, a big investment. But whoever dominates AI to control the thousands or tens of thousands of pieces of metal, they're the ones that are going to win it. They're going to dominate, and the race on that is very clear. It's very present. And I think if you look at that, that's where I think the ball is going. And the US doesn't want to lose that. Europe, doesn't have a choice. It's got to invest very heavily inside of that because China wants that edge, and if they get that, then they are going to dominate militaristically.
Thank you. I think that young lady will take on the right.
Marco, I can add just one thing. I think, in a way, Europe has the luxury of, we need to be better than Russia, whereas US needs to be better than China. And that's a very different ballgame. Now, obviously, China and Russia are in the same camp, and China is learning from Russian experience on the ground. But, you know, the next phase is definitely autonomy, and this is where China is investing heavily in, so it's AI, robotics, and they're ahead of us. Yeah, and this is also, I think, an opportunity for Europe, where we are great in robotics, in industrial robotics, we're number one in Europe. And perhaps, you know, this is the added value that Europe is bringing, the transatlantic tech relationship, so that it's no longer as one-sided as it used to be.
Thank you, Mark. That's very interesting.
right.
In the back.
Thank you. Ivan Ivatsky here, I'm an expert for implementing AI solutions. And Marco, I want to pick up on something that you've highlighted in the introduction to decrease the duration of innovation cycles. And now within all over the globe, there are companies that sit with heritage processes, and also they come with those, they come with given times of delivery processes as well. Mark, you said something that particularly in the Ukraine, they are very fast in how they deliver, and it will be required for companies that they adapt to the speed in delivery. What is the one thing that companies now need to do in order for them to be able to deliver in that given speed, given the complexity that they come with, that they actually need to transform the way of doing that?
Who feels it? John?
I don't think it's the companies that are going to struggle. I think it's the customers. Because we've got used to a relationship where there are multiple interlocutors between the person who uses the kit and the person who builds it. And the reason Ukraine works as fast as it does is because the technologist and the tactician are side by side. And our portfolio companies that we've got out there, so Arcs, Together, Star, they have teams forward who are sat next to the people using their kit. That's how fast it gets. I don't think, I never, to be honest, I never worry about the companies moving fast enough. They've just got to have the users next to them. But if they've got to go through 3 or 4 stages, commercial staff and contracts people, everything else, it will never be fast enough.
But what's the answer? I mean, do we need sandboxes? Do we need innovation spaces? I mean, it's very easy to say we need the customers need to move faster. But we know as well as anybody how long it takes to change.
You just need to remove those layers. And we've done it before. We do it when we go to war. So I was out in Afghanistan and I was involved in the counter ID battle out there. And we were able to have the people who are developing the technology alongside us outside on the ground. And we do it every time we're in conflict because we know it works. And then we get back to peacetime and all of the barriers go back in place. And all of these people who are adding value sit themselves between the people who know what they're doing. And that's how it comes back again.
Okay, one more question in the back.
Hi. Everything you say makes sense, completely aligned, and it just goes back to what you just said, John. If there are 60,000 people that work for the European Commission, how do you change that mindset? There's research in psychology and business change that you need to change 30% of the people in the room before you get change. So are you going to fire 20,000 people at European Commission? Or
Yes. Yes.
I will not comment. No, what I can say is that since defense has never been a European Commission thing until very recently, they're starting from a blank slate. And they're in a very privileged position to do that because they're not burdened by legacy structures within the Commission that have been dealing with this topic for decades or legacy thinking. And I really believe that Commissioner Bilius, the Defense and Space Commissioner, brought in an incredible energy and clarity for this. And that they've been assembling teams around DG DEFIS that are really world class. And some of the fastest moving teams I've seen, not just within the Commission, but more broad. They're super lean, agile, they listen, they take notes, they try to implement best solutions from Ukraine and abroad. And if you look at the white paper on European defense, it's really well written. If you look at the SAFE instrument that they've implemented, it goes exactly in the right direction, incentivizing joint procurement among different armed forces within Europe, and so on and so forth. So I would say
European Commission can be a problem in general, but in this particular part, it's actually a force of good in unification of the European defense market. So.
That actually makes me very optimistic, because Mark typically is the biggest critic of European defense.
Can I just add that that was a real challenge, because as we were trying to lean into digital as the commander of the Navy, I realized that I probably had to replace 3 of my flag officers because they were going to be against change. And so that whole culture piece had to be addressed head on. And so what we ended up saying is, because they think of industry, profiteering, money grabbing, they don't care about nation building and all that good stuff. So we ended up having to say to them, okay, at the end of the day, fundamentally as a Navy, we're motivated by profits as well. It's just that we don't measure our profits in dollars and cents. We measure them in material, combat, technical readiness going forward. So once we're able to get them through that mindset that there are industry best practices, and 80% of what Canadian Armed Forces or any military force does is exactly the same as industry, that only 20% delta is in the battle space. And that's where we're going to get industry and the military together in the battle space. It's a very, very powerful thing. And the more we can do that, I think the more successful we're all going to be.
Ludwig.
Hi, Ludwig Sam. The question I have is European DARPA, or maybe we should invite Canada as well, and Australia and others. What do you think the chances are of that, and who could finance that? That would be one question. And if the threat horizon that our generals talk about, that Putin will attack us by 29 or 30, which I not necessarily subscribe to, maybe earlier. But if that's true, how do we manage the dual track of still working with the Palantirs and the Andrijanič as opposed to setting up our own startups?
Interesting. Take that one.
Look, I think there's 2 pieces to this, right? The first bit is, despite kind of where the American administration is, the American companies still want to do business. And I think that's very important to remember. And I think that's going to still bring a lot of technology and a lot of talent and a lot of capabilities into the European market. And ultimately, that's one bit to kind of keep in mind is the companies, have to play with the administration, but they're not the administration. I think the second bit is you're going to have to build up your own talent inside of Europe. And, that side of it there is I think, the bit where you talk about the funding, you talk about the culture, you talk about also getting enough people excited about this is something when they graduate that they want to get in and solve. But I'm pretty optimistic about that. I've been working with one of the German companies, Hypersonica, which just had a successful launch. 50 people, they just hit Mark 6 on their first rocket, like a hypersonic missile, like Silicon Valley would look at that and say that's best in class. So it's very clear you can do that. I think, we're going to see a renaissance, I think, of American defense technology, but that's going to be coupled with, I think, a renaissance of European defense technology. I'm very bullish about where this all goes, and I think Europe's going to have a large number of very, very interesting defense tech companies coming up in the next 12 months.
I'm just going to build that. I spoke to the Hypersonica guys when I was the innovation director, and it was the 2 of them. They just come out of Oxford University and else. Absolutely amazing what they've achieved in that time. I have absolutely no doubts that Europe has got all the talent it needs, particularly when Ukraine comes. We see the ability to leverage what's already been done there. Poland, again, an absolute powerhouse in terms of coding. So there is no doubt about the talent. What we're trying to do as part of the ecosystem is just make sure we've got that capital stack, particularly at late stage funding. Then we absolutely will have the Andrijanič and the Palantirs in Europe as well. I think that's good for the US as well, because I think that's good competition for them. I think it's very interesting when you see US founders now we're talking to a number of them who want to set up in Europe. The reason I want to set up in Europe is because of the size of the market, because if they develop their products in Europe, they're not NATO restricted, so they don't have the same challenges of then exporting their products. So I think Europe's in a really good place. We just need the rest of that capital stack. Critically, we need those contracts, because that's our good.
Amazing. Thank you. So I hear a big
So we've got bits of that already. So there's ARIA in the UK. I'm not sure there's a massive. A lot of this is happening anyway. I'm not sure that it's always having to have or government-funded research and development. It goes back to my earlier point. I think sometimes those really, really big bets, that's where you need it. But I visited in the UK recently the Fusion, one of the Fusion development agencies. Really impressive. So fantastic stuff going on there. So I think there are bits and pieces together. Whether or not you need to sort of consolidate them a little bit more, I think is a fair question. There's a sort of fragmentation in Europe. I speak as a Brit, clearly. So sometimes when you see some of these programs where you could bring these things together a bit more closely, that's been frustrating to see a bit of fragmentation now.
But there has been a lot of talk recently about JEDI, European Defence Innovation Agency. There's been a lot of talk for the last couple of years. I haven't seen anything coming out of it yet. Any other opinions?
I think two of the institutions that have done very well in the American market, one has been InQtel, which I think is gold standard for defense technology investment. And Europe, if it can match half of what InQtel has done, I think it will be in a very, very good place. And the second one more recently has been DIU, and I think they've really hit their stride. So there are two things there where you can look at and say, actually, for supporting emerging technologies that are relevant for defence in a way that understands emerging technology companies and understands the defence buyer, you've got two great examples. And Europe, I think, one measure of its success is if we come back 12 months, can we point to those two things and say, actually, you know what? This European organisation does it better than InQtel, or does it better than DIU.
It's also worth reading the history of DARPA, because the early history of DARPA is horrific. I mean, it's really bad. So it's in a good place now, but it's been around for a very long time. Same thing, InQtel's like 25 years old. So yeah, these things take time.
Thank you, John. I think the answer to the question was there will be no European DARPA. Thank you. So we've covered the right side. I sometimes get accused of neglecting the left. Robert, you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to touch on a bit of a different topic in that ecosystem, because the session has gone from lab to the battlefield, and I come from a very lab-heavy area, which is biotech. But I feel, especially in the age of AI, biological threats tend to be a little underestimated, even though we are more and more facing pandemics, resistant infections, or also bioterrorism. And therefore, I want to ask you, what's your stance on also implementing biological safety in the whole defense equation?
So, yay or nay on chemical weapons? Yeah, probably a bad thing.
So we are doing that. So we made, I think we're probably now on 2 biotech investments, because we view defense, we want to invest across defense, security, and resilience. We see biotech investments absolutely as part of the resilience side of that. I would say that there is not enough money spent in defense. This is an area. So I'll correct myself. I first put on a uniform in 1989 in the Cold War, which is a bit scary. We spent a lot of time practicing for nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare. We spent a lot of time in respirators and suits. We were actually really good at it at that stage. Those skills, that kit has really, really atrophied over the last few years. And I think some of the technologies that are around are both extremely scary in terms of the threat they can produce. They're also quite reassuring in terms of some of the countermeasures you can generate. So it's definitely an area that we are focused on, yes.
Great, thank you. And Robert was the one I paid to bring the discussion to my pet subject of life sciences. There's a question on the left-hand side, not the guy with lots of hair, the guy with slightly less hair. Thank you.
I think it's not okay. Andrijanič, Goethe University, Frankfurt. I have a question. It's an easy game to blame politicians and bureaucracy, but if we look at big defensive projects, the average delay was in Germany 44 months. Additionally, we have a notorious corruption problem in defense. How can we make the defense sector and the companies more accountable? We don't have the time to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years for new tanks, helicopters. Without more control, still being innovative.
Look, just make it a competitive process. Like, if you've got something that resembles a meritocratic system where the best technology delivered the fastest wins, you will have a healthy ecosystem. We haven't had that for a long time, and it's starting to come back. And a lot of the entrenched players want this over their dead bodies, right? It's the last thing that they want, right? Because they know that they're not going to be able to compete, and they know that all the things that they put inside of their organization to kind of do government lobbying, to do investor relations, to do all of the pieces that ensure they sit at the top, and none of which are engineering, right? So make it a competitive meritocratic process. May the best company win, and may it happen as fast as possible. You do that, you get a healthy ecosystem. You dance around that, you end up losing.
Thank you very much. I think we've got time for 2 more questions. Thank you.
Nicholas Yellen, the hair is natural. My question is for Vice Admiral Lloyd. You mentioned innovating ethically. So I wanted to ask you, what does that mean in defense innovation, and how do we do it at speed?
So repeat the front end of your question, please.
The first question was, what is innovating ethically in defense innovation? Because you touched on the topic very...
Yeah, so the context was, when we're going to use artificial intelligence, we want to make sure that it's ethically used in accordance with the law of armed conflict. Our adversaries aren't going to care about the ethical use necessarily of artificial intelligence in the battle space. So if in the kill chain, AI is making the decision and it's ordnance on target based on AI, that wouldn't meet our threshold of the ethical use of AI. And so where is it that you're going to have a human in the loop in order to make that decision? And so if every AI nexus in the kill chain has to have an operating loop, that's not what success probably looks like. So what does right look like? And I think what we're finding, the more we're getting comfortable with AI, just like when we were using computers way back when, I think we'll see that humans in the loop are very strategically placed in order to ensure that that decision-making cycle, that OODA loop, is as tightly as possible. Because if we're not using AI, it's going to be a very, very challenging circumstance, particularly in the Indo-Asia Pacific.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I get, so this is something we take really seriously in the fund, and we have a person whose one job it is to do sustainability and responsible use, and I've just recruited into that post. So that post is directly responsible when they're working with the portfolio companies to help them understand how to deal with these incredibly high-speed technology advancements, but do it in a way that aligns with NATO's principles of responsible use. They're actually pretty good. I have to say, when you read them, they are sensible, they're technology agnostic, and they allow you to steer in a direction which retains your license to operate, which you need when you're effectively representing your nations as an armed force. And there is a challenge because our adversaries won't do that. But that's something we've dealt with for a very long time. We have the Geneva Convention. We've fought wars in particular ways. We've said certain things are not acceptable, and we just need to decide what they are. It's not easy though, because the technology is moving at such a pace, and we've moved from human in the loop to human on the loop. We keep it's a really tough challenge to work out where we want to put policies that align with ethics, that align with legalities. It is not an easy area, but that's why we put someone in the fund specifically responsible for those sorts of decisions.
Yeah, I can see the organizers getting a little bit nervous about our overrun. Sean, you shook your head, and Mark, you shook your head too, so I think I need to...
We've danced around this whole space, like, it's a sort of, AI, killing AI machines, like, that piece comes through. But the reality is all weapons are autonomous weapons in the future, and all wars are autonomous wars. And we are going to have to be comfortable with machines killing machines, and machines killing people. Like, that's going to be the reality of the world that we're going to go into. I think the bit that we're also going to be comfortable with, they'll probably do a better job following the rules and the regulations than we as humans do. And that's the bit here, is we assume that humans are better than machines at behaving ethically. And the reality is we're probably not. Machines will probably do a better job with rules of engagement than we are. And I think that the sooner that we embrace the fact that the machines are going to outcompete us on ethical decisions, the sooner we can get on with what the future of warfare is actually going to be, which is autonomous warfare.
Well, sounds like something out of Mad Max.
So I'll just repeat something that I've heard from a top Ukrainian official, the Goldberg book.
if Ukraine was part of the EU already, and we had all the AI regulation and GDPRs in this world, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. And that's, I think, a fact of life.
Okay, thank you. Now we have time for one last question, and you have the unique chance to ask the shortest question in the history of the Salon LuitPold.
How would you know? It's the first time you're here. What rule we have here? Never give away the mic. I never give away.
Okay. We've heard a lot about procurement, innovations, AI, and so on. I'm missing the last piece of this topic, or this evening, battlefield. How do we actually bring all this to the battlefield in a meaningful way? Talking about, we had this infamous exercise last year, Hedgehog 25, where basically 10 Ukrainians, they wiped out, calculationally, they wiped out 2 battalions per day of NATO troops. Simply because they have trained and fought in a way they have trained for the last 2,000 years. They have staging areas, supply areas, and so on, and you can't do nothing. They come with drones and they simply just wipe them out. How do we train the troops with all these new innovations so they're up to date and up to overcoming conflicts very fast?
Thank you very much. Thanks for this introduction. Now starts the second part of the evening.
What? I just wonder what your question would be like if I said, ask a long question. Who feels entitled and capable?
I've got no doubt if you give these tools to the soldiers, sailors, aviators that I know, they will absolutely know how to use them. We must learn from what Ukraine has already learned. That's absolutely critical. And I'm really reassured by what I see. Or from a UK perspective, I'm seeing Ukrainians training in the UK and their trainers are learning as much from them as they're learning to Ukraine. I think the challenge now is that in the past we've tried to design this thing and then build the technology to fit it. I think a lot of this now is give these people the technology, they're smart individuals, and they will come up with really imaginative things, ways to use it, which I think will surprise us all.
We are filming.
So you think you misunderstood my question. So it's not about how to use it, it's about how to adapt to it and how to react to it. What does a battalion do if suddenly 500 drones coming in flying?
That's my point, is we need to give them those drones as well. So we need to give them the same technology they're going to be faced with, and I guarantee they will come up with good solutions. I genuinely believe that. I think the creativity and the imagination of our soldiers they will use these tools in ways that we wouldn't be able to kind of design from top down, but they need to have access to them. What you can't do is just say, there's a thing over there in a catalogue which you can stare at, and then you might get to play with it once on an exercise. We need to deploy this stuff at scale and let them learn how to use these things, because that's the only way that they're going to work out how to respond when they're used against them.
Okay. We have the last answer from a Vice Admiral.
I would suggest that the one thing that's missing from the conversation is sustainment. That's something we're ignoring at our peril. And so if we don't get that right, then we're going to get one crack at it, and then we'll be done. And so until we start turning our focus and energies on sustainment, I dare say it's going to be a very short conversation.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we agree that this has been a fascinating discussion. Maybe you'll just join me in thanking our panelists for this lovely. Indeed for coming, for taking time off out of your busy MSC schedules, and we very much hope to see you again, sometimes here in the forum. It's been my first time, and certainly not my last one. Thank you very much for having us.
Oh, Marco, you passed the test. You passed the test. I did not introduce him actually, so let me just 10 seconds. Marco is an entrepreneur, investor, and venture builder based in Munich. He has studied in Oxford physics. And he is in life sciences, deep tech, innovation systems. He holds various roles as CEO. He's founding partner of Procurement Partners and managing director of Life Science Factory. And he's initiator of the DEEP Institute and will come back. Thanks for all of you. It was amazing. I want you back next year, same time. And now you get some cake.
Thank you to our noble host, Stefan Meyer.
There is still hope.